Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. And while Boris Johnson is busy not running the country, various people and groups on the right have been calling upon him to ramp up his efforts to get office-based workers back to the office and not working from home, where, you know, many of them are doing their jobs potentially more efficiently and certainly a lot safer. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, the debate that has sprung up about office-based work and whether people should be encouraged to go back to the office or remain working at home, assuming that they can do that work just as well or better from home, is one that I've covered before, but it's taken a more widespread spotlight now, and I don't think the timing is a coincidence, because before, the arguments about getting people back from the home offices into the real ones was fairly muted. There were those calling for it for the same reasons they're doing now. You know, and it's not just because of the obvious advantages to working at home that sort of stifle this debate, and the obvious risks to travelling needlessly in order to do work in a room full of people from different households that could easily be done remotely. To say nothing, of course, of the risks in using public transport for those who need to do that as well. The major barrier was essentially childcare, and there was nothing to be done about that. Many of these workers simply unable to arrange childcare, with many facilities either closed or running a smaller service, and schools shut. Well, schools are reopening. This removes one barrier to returning to the office for a significant proportion of the workforce. So that is why I think the timing is as it is. So then there's that issue of safety. Well, it's now perfectly safe to travel into work and sit in an office in the middle of town, say all the people whose huge incomes depend upon the extortionate rates that they collect for renting out office space. Nothing suspicious there at all, is there? But Conservatives are not all that adept at wielding carrots when it comes to arguments, so you won't see any arguments used to explain the advantages of returning to the office. There's no advantages. They're much more comfortable in using fear stories. But to what extent are they credible? Well, to be fair, they're not entirely to be dismissed, I suppose. So, I mean, the advantages to both the worker and the employer for home-based working are obvious, but I'll go over a few anyway. So if your workforce even splits their time between working at home and working in the office, there are huge benefits. So splitting your time between home and office means the employer can rent smaller offices, because you don't need a desk for everyone. You just need a desk for everyone that's going to be in that day. So, you know, working areas can be disinfected at the end of the day and used by someone else the next day if you've got people who come in certain days. It also means lower utility bills, lower tea bills, biscuit bills, that sort of thing, because your workers will be paying for those at home. If that's where they're working from. Many managers have been turned on to the benefits of having meetings run remotely, because even if you had people physically in office and you went back to that, I think a lot would still do this, because if you want to get a small team together, okay, that's fine. But if you want to get a larger team together, then that means finding, you know, a conference room that's free or something like some large space. Well, now you can just say, well, just headset. You know, do it through Microsoft Teams or Google Meet or something like that. Works better, and you don't have to find yourself a conference space. You know, that will work even if people do fully go back. So it makes sense. And that can be done remotely, of course. Beauty of it. So for the worker, you save travelling time and expenses as well, if you don't have to go into the office every day at least. And you can spread the wealth a bit better by supporting your local economy when you need a sandwich for lunchtime or something, instead of concentrating all that money in the city centres. So what about the stick being employed by those owners of office space that desperately want people to risk increasing the rate of transmission just to pad their coffers? So they argue that people risk losing their jobs if they are averse to going back to the office. Now, I haven't really seen much of an explanation to this from those making the threats. However, I did see one credible argument in this area. It wasn't from someone who was arguing that people should go back to the office, but it was thrown in there. Now, the argument goes that if an office-based worker can work from anywhere, they could work from home, well then that company could employ anyone. What is to stop, for example, those companies casting their nets rather wider for their employees? And no, I don't just mean a London-based company hiring from Blackpool, say. But what if they found that they could hire people much more cheaply from other countries? I was reading this in an article that reminded me, they also talked about a story about a guy in America, and I'd heard this some years ago. I can't remember the detail. I'm in Seattle. It was a guy who lived in an expensive city in America. And what they'd done is they'd got themselves office-based work, but they worked at home. And they'd got themselves several jobs. And what this crafty, conniving little gentleman did was he subcontracted the work out to India. He got people in India doing these jobs for him. He was taking in the salary. He paid them a sum that was much less than his salary, and he was raking in the difference. Great. He just sat at home, available on the phone, but he just basically sat at home collecting the money. Nice one. But it highlighted that actually a lot of this work could be done, from people overseas. And that is a risk. There is actually that risk. But the thing is, that risk isn't heightened by people deciding actually home-based work is better. Because let's say it were to become a large issue, apart from anything else, the government would have to take some sort of action because it would be a major source of unemployment in this country. But the thing is, you have to follow this through. People are trying to suggest, if lots of people don't go back to the offices, this will happen. Well, what was to stop employers doing that already? And if this pandemic, if it took this pandemic to turn some employers onto the possibility of doing that, well, they can still do that anyway. It's already turned them onto that. The bottom line is that employers can do as they please in this regard. If an employer wants people to be physically in a space, back in an office, then once it is genuinely safe to do so, they will be able to insist that their workers do this. They already basically can. It's just that a lot of employers will not, because at the end of the day, regardless of anything, they are responsible for the health and safety of employees at the workplace. If someone were to become infected with COVID as a result of going into work when they didn't need to, that employer would be legally liable. Health and Safety at Work Act. So that's why a lot of them are not doing so at the moment. But when it's genuinely safe to do so, if they want to do that, they'll be able to do that. Nothing to do with the worker. Nothing, not up to them. If they see the advantages in having their workers then working partly at home, well, they can do that too. They can either offer it or they can even insist on it. It can be part of the terms of the contract. And if they decide to dispense with local office workers altogether and just cast their net wide, even internationally, do you know what? They'll be able to do that as well. Nothing to do with how people's attitudes towards home-based or office-based working. Nothing to do with the pandemic or public opinion. Nothing can change those possibilities. Those possibilities existed before. If employers hadn't thought about them, they just weren't very thoughtful. And if they have thought about them now, well, they're still on the table, regardless of what happens. So overall, I don't buy that argument. If there's another one, okay, fine, but I haven't seen it. The notion itself, there's a risk. Of course it's a risk, but it would be a risk as people moved on anyway. That risk is out there regardless. Then there are those who don't cope well working at home. So I had some of these comments the last time I did this video, some time ago now. Some people, I wouldn't cope well on my own. Okay. There are those who would prefer to be in the office amongst other people. Again, this is where employers could be flexible. So workers who cope very well at home could maybe go into the office one day a week, maybe even one day every 2 weeks. I mean, that's up to the employer. And maybe if others don't cope so well at home, well, maybe they could go in more days, maybe every day. There's the flexibility that would exist. Maybe some people just don't have the space at home to set up an office. Even moving to some of your workers at some of the time working at home still provides the benefits I already discussed to both worker and employer. And if it doesn't work to the advantage of a small number of extremely wealthy individuals who want to rent out their tawdry office space for a ridiculous amount of money, not all of it's tawdry, some of it's very nice, but it is still extortionately priced, driving up the cost of living while they're doing it, well then, tough Sodom. And as for the other argument, so they say that, well, there are businesses who depend on there being large numbers of people concentrated in a district heavily populated by officers. You know, sandwich shops, that sort of thing. Absolutely, yeah, that's true. But here's the thing. So the reason those businesses work is because of what we'd consider at the moment, not at the moment, but, you know, generally, the modern pattern of working, office-based working. So there are the people there spending the money on them. Now, if we change to a pattern of working, different pattern of working, the money's still there, not in the same place, but the money still exists, still in those people's pockets, and businesses can take advantage of that. Let us not forget that the people arguing for the swift return of people to offices are also those who are always talking up the private sector of the virtues of capitalism. Okay then, put your money where your mouth is. Good businesses, run by people with the acumen to adapt, they'll do so. Poor businesses will fail. Isn't that how capitalism is supposed to work? Finally, if the people arguing for workers to return are so concerned with the economy, why do they constantly support and even encourage governments who funnel so much of our country's wealth into the hands of billionaires who put it in offshore bank accounts where it will never again have any further contact with the British economy? No. This is pure hypocrisy. There is absolutely an argument to be had about the pros and cons of going back to the office. I don't think it's, I am more in favour of more people working at home when it suits them, because I think it's benefit for both of them. I'm sort of on that side. But I absolutely agree that there are arguments for and against. But it's not an argument that these people have much credibility in being involved in. You know, it's like the Daily Mail columnist Richard Littlejohn. Someone may have heard of this. He wrote a piece about why everyone should get themselves back to the office pronto. And yet he didn't try and hide this, to be fair. He himself has worked from home for the past 30 years. Hilarious. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.